Welcome back, viewers. We are joined by the VC of Niti Aayog, Mr. Bery. Mr. Bery, good evening. Thank you very much for speaking to Times Now. Thank you for speaking to me. Simple and direct questions to you. A lot has been made, of course, about the reformist streak of this budget, the fact that allocations, for example, to the agricultural sector or on policies that benefit the farmers have been pruned, and there is a general thrust towards lessening entitlement and increasing the empowerment quotient. The opposition says that this is a callous government that has forgotten about the welfare of farmers. The word poverty and several other adjectives to describe the disadvantage have not even been used in the budget. Unemployment, joblessness, none of them figure in the budget speech, and only twice has the word poor been mentioned. How do you respond to this?
Rahul, I would say that, in all societies, there is a central left point of view and a center right point of view. The center right point of view, which I think this government has been repeatedly re-elected to express, essentially believes in empowerment, in safety nets, but in what economists call agency of the individual rather than handouts. Okay? So I think the budget has a very clear logic to it. It does derive from the perception of the from the vision of the Prime Minister at the Red Fort. India should aspire to be a developed country by 2047, and developed is a matter of, yes, per capita income, but it is also a matter of agency and choice. Now, what this, as I see it, what this budget is doing is acknowledging the fact, and this was acknowledged yesterday in the economic survey as well, that there are continuing global headwinds, and then is looking for ways to empower, your word, many pockets in India which are capable of compensating from the demand drag that is coming from the external sector, both in terms of trade and also finance. So that to me is the logic, and if you like, I can talk about, as it were, all of those latent pockets of activity that this government or this budget is trying to activate. But if you believe that you've had enough recitation of that, we can talk about other things. But I would say that, for example, the focus on self-help groups, empowering them, makes me it strikes me as very reminiscent, actually, of the journey that Italy went in the 20 or 30 years after the war. Italy has now emerged as a fashion capital of the world. It wasn't always so. We today are at the per capita income of Italy in 1953. Okay? And so I think one thrust of this budget is to say we have our Vishwakarmas, we have our self-help groups, we have our one district, one product. India is an entrepreneurial and creative society which has, in many ways, been ignored by the growth thrust of the past. And this is an opportunity, as people are trying to recover from COVID, of unlocking the energy and the talent in some of the more forgotten parts of the society.
Okay, well, one way of doing that, of course, is to also ensure
I don't
that...
regard this.
Right.
I don't regard this as callous.
As callous. You don't regard this as callous. So let me ask you, because...
Yeah, please go ahead.
The finance minister made a large sort of, what should one say, symbolic move to suggest that she had sort of wanted to benefit the middle class, and that she was handing out some tax rebates to the middle class. Now, it turns out that these rebates will only apply to those who are moving to the new tax regime. First things first, Mr. Bery, how many people actually do fall in the new regime net? Could you first tell us that? Because the opposition says that this is a eyewash, because the number of people in the new tax regime are less. And why would they want to move to the new tax regime? Because if they were to do so, to use your word, safety net, that safety net that the old tax regime provides would go.
On your first point about what has been the migration pardon me, from the old to the new, that is something that belongs in the Department of Revenue. I can't answer that.
Why hasn't the government released that number?
There is always again, I'm a part of government, Niti Aayog, which deals with the longer term, but I don't. So I don't have an answer to that. But there have been plenty
of Mr. Bery, the reason I'm asking you this question
for these questions
is because if one were to test the finance minister on the merit of her claim that a large number of the middle class are going to benefit from this particular rebate, then surely one must know what are the number of people who subscribe to the new tax regime. Surely that follows, doesn't it?
I would reframe what you're saying, Rahul, in a different way. I would say that the the finance minister has been very specific that they would like the new tax regime to become the default regime, and they are creating incentives for that migration. So this is the way in which reform is done. I think you're wrong to say that this is in some sense a trick. They have clearly stated that in the interest of modernizing the direct tax regime, they are moving in the direction of all tax systems worldwide, which is to simplify and eliminate exemptions. There are beneficiaries of exemptions under the old scheme, and they have left that choice up to each taxpayer. This strikes me as both fair and a reasonable reform strategy. So I'm not sure quite why you believe there's sharp practice here.
No, I'm glad that you've actually clarified that you want to
incentives have been provided for the transition.
So you want to make the new tax regime, the new tax regime, the new default regime. That's what you want to do, and that's really what it is all about. Sort of transferring a set of taxpayers from the old to the new. That's really, and you call that reform. Well, the opposition says that you're removing the safety net, and that these exemptions then fall by the wayside, etc., etc. So could you explain?
Rahul, I mean, I think the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. I mean, does the transition occur or not?
Okay, well, I suppose if people really wanted to avail of the advantages that you suggest, or the reform that you suggest is exemplified by the new tax regime, they would have moved by now. And that's perhaps the reason why the government hasn't made those figures public. It would be interesting to see those figures, because that would tell us whether the public really accepts this. But nonetheless, I just want to ask you a final question before I let you go, because we're running out of time. There have been a number of subsidy cuts. Now, you've said that this is not callousness, that this is really an attempt to modernize our economy and move it forward. So I'll just ask you, I lay it bare there. Why haven't we then brought in farmers into the tax net? Why should rich farmers, who perhaps earn as much as maybe well-off lawyers and doctors, not be made to pay the same tax rates?
You are, aware of the sensitivity of this issue, and I think you have to accept that a budget has to be alert to the political context in which it is being framed. If you're asking me whether that is a direction in which India in time should move, I would agree that efficiency would suggest that that's a direction in which to move. If you're asking me why did this budget not do it, I would say that may have been an unrealistic expectation.
Given the fact that we have an election in about 15 months. Fair enough. I think you've been very honest here, Mr. Suman Bery. My final question, divestment targets have been lowered. Why is that, sir?
Well, I think partly it is to ensure realism in the budget. I mean, there's no point of having targets that you can't achieve. I think there has been a lot of ambition in the past. Again, I think there's been a strong thrust towards realism in the budget, and again, to some extent, Niti has been involved with these discussions in the past, and the question of whether implementation could take place in this year or not must have been one issue. There is an overhang from divestment targets in the past. Those did not form a part of the budget speech, but I think the issue is really to deliver on what has previously been indicated.
Well, I suppose the same constraints, the same political constraints before an election apply here too. The reason I asked you this question was because I understand that the Kisan is a vital vote bank. Clearly, the middle class is not seen as one, and therefore, to raise money, once again, the middle class is being sort of prodded and has really not got substantial relief, even though there has been a push in that direction.
Rahul, I have to stop you there.
Okay.
I mean, do you believe that the people who ride on Vande Bharat trains are not middle class? Do you believe that people who ride Delhi Metro are not middle class? These are all the ways in which the middle class benefits from the infrastructure investments of this economy.
Yeah. Well, well, I didn't say, actually...
you're running out of time.
I agree with you. I agree with you, Mr. Bery. I completely agree with you. It's just that the finance minister made the point in her budget, not Rahul Shivshankar, that the time had come to give back something to the middle class. The question is, has it been substantive enough, or was it just symbolic? That's what I was trying to get out. But it's been a wonderful conversation. I wish we could have a deeper one, perhaps for the weekend. We will. Thank you, Mr. Bery, for being very upfront